we have to think about, are we asking the AI the right questions early on? If we ask AI the wrong questions, we will get the wrong results based on the data we put into it. And one of the challenges is actually making sure that we don't ask the wrong questions to the systems we build.
Welcome to the Agile Digital Transformation Podcast, where we explore different aspects of digital transformation and digital experience with your host, Tim Butera, Content and Community Manager at AgileDrop.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm joined today by Simon Wakeman, Chief Operating Officer at the UK technology group, the Panoply. In this episode, Simon and I will be talking about the role of automation and conversational AI in a digital strategy. Welcome, Simon. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be with you.
Okay, I think it makes the most sense to begin with something more general and basic, and because automation is quite a broad term, so not all of our listeners may know exactly what we'll be covering today. So can you give us kind of a brief introduction or a short overview of automation?
Absolutely, sure. So artificial intelligence, AI, has been around a long time. Lots of people talk about AI, but what we now see is a maturing of artificial intelligence. So it actually means that automation as part of a digital transformation program is a reality for organizations in lots of different sectors. If I think about the kind of work we do at Green Shoot Labs, we work in two particular areas. We think about automation as making someone's life easier. We're either making life easier for our users, so they could be our customers or our members or our donors if we're a charity, or we could be making life easier through automation for our organizations. So people that work in a company or a charity or a government organization, how can we automate the work they do day to day to make their lives easier and to make things more efficient for the organization?
And also, in the context of making the things easier for the organization, not only easier, but also leaving more space for the creative tasks, because it's usually the things that can be automated that take up a significant chunk of an employee's time. So being able to automate that kind of gives so much power and agency to that employee.
Absolutely. And yeah, our focus with automation should be about how do we automate the things that machines are good at and humans actually aren't that good at, and how do we therefore make space for humans to do the things that only humans can do.
So I guess we kind of answered my next question, at least partially now, and that is why automation? Like, is there anything else that we haven't covered under the business value of automation and how it can help drive DT?
I mean, if you look at it from that lens of users and organizations, for users, really, that means that we can drive up satisfaction. So we can have happier customers. We can have less customers leaving us, so we can reduce customer churn potentially. And when we're trying to sell additional products, those cross-selling to existing customers, we can drive value per customer up as well. So there's a number of different metrics that actually demonstrate the value of automation in an existing customer setting. Within an organization, we can think about how can we use automation, artificial intelligence, conversational AI to drive down the cost per serve. So it costs us less to serve our customers and actually get a better experience. And also, how can we scale? So some of the work we've done at Green Shoot Labs has been helping small organizations actually serve far, far more customers than they could ever do through traditional means, purely by using conversational AI.
So you definitely say that there's a lot of potential here, and kind of it's a very broad. The benefits are very, very far-reaching.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing. And Green Shoot Labs has been in existence as a standalone business for about 3 years now, and even in those 3 years, we've seen the technology come on leaps and bounds, and that means that really the possibilities of what we can do now will be small compared to what we could do in 5 years' time. And actually, for lots of organizations, it's about how do we get on the journey? How do we start experimenting and learning about conversational AI? Because once you've started that, the possibilities will grow in the future as the technology continues to evolve very rapidly.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the fields that I've seen grow the most rapidly. I think we're primed for even more exponential growth of AI and similar technologies.
Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely.
And what are some types of automation that we're seeing being employed the most frequently? Are there some trends that you expect to see rising enormously in the coming years?
I think the ones that we're seeing right now are the start of automating tasks that are relatively low level, relatively high volume. So if we think about the complexity of a task for someone who maybe is contacting an organization to receive a service, to sign up for something, or to change their details if they're moving house or something like that, those low level repetitive tasks are straightforward to automate. And actually those are the kind of things where customers are getting a far faster service. Within organizations, we're working with a number of organizations about their HR and their IT help desks. So for example, resetting a user's password within a corporate organization is actually a really, really time consuming task because it happens so often. How can we automate that? And we can save time for those users within the organization. So I think at the moment it is those low level tasks that are low level single or short sequences of tasks that are most easily automated. The growth in the future will be about the multi-stage conversations that will happen. So it won't just be a case of a few short interactions. It will be actually a long sequence of interactions, open-ended interactions, where it's far more complex. And we may be dispensing, for example, more complex advice rather than fulfilling a simple task. It will be about listening in the conversation, the artificial intelligence understanding what's going on in that conversation, and then providing appropriate advice within the bounds of the way the system has been configured. And those are the kind of things where we're still at relatively early stage for market maturity.
Okay, I want to just return to something, to the example that you gave earlier about automating the updating of a password. And the thought that crossed my mind when you said that, are there any additional risks, especially in this example, that you need to be aware of if you do it in an automated way rather than doing it manually?
Yeah, there's certainly security considerations to think of. I mean, within an enterprise, it's relatively easy to undertake some of those kind of things. But we see, for example, financial institutions using voice recognition as a tool to authenticate as well. So the combination of automate a audio-based chatbot and voice analysis actually can provide really high levels of security. So there's different options, but it's definitely something to think about.
That's a very good example, yeah. Can you think of some further, maybe even more specific examples of automation being put to really great use, like solving really, really particular pains or producing very unexpected gains?
Yeah, I mean, so one of my favorite examples is a project we did for a UK charity called Cyber Helpline. So this is a very small charity set up by people who are cybersecurity experts, and they set up this charity to help people who've been the victims of cybercrime. So, for example, if you have a virus on your laptop or ransomware or anything like that, because that's a major and growing problem, but it's also very difficult to get help because it's a very, very specialist area. And they wanted to grow. They have volunteers who provide telephone support, but they wanted to see how can a chatbot help them extend the reach of what they do. So what we did was we did a discovery phase and understood how they provide the service at the moment. And then we thought, how can we use a chatbot to provide that service? So what we've developed is a chatbot that anyone can use, and you go onto it and you just describe what's happened. So you may say, I'm being asked to pay 100 Bitcoin to access my files or something like that. And then we've developed a knowledge graph working with the volunteers. So we basically codified the knowledge they have, and then built a system that analyzes what people tell it, and then does a scoring. So it will basically say, I think this is 90% likely to be ransomware, or 75% likely to be a virus, or whatever the type of attack is. And then it will provide some questions that allow it to clarify its thinking. So is it right? Is it definitely ransomware? And then it will provide advice on the back of that. It will also escalate a more complex case. So if it's not sure, or if it hasn't seen something like this before, because the threat is always changing, it will escalate that to a human. So what we've allowed them to do is reach far, far more people than they could with just human volunteers. And actually, we're really, really proud that the detection rate is about 73%. So about 3/4 of every problem that you present to it, it correctly identifies and then gives the advice that's relevant to that. The client is also able to update that. And so the knowledge graph is always changing as cyber criminals change their attack vectors. We've allowed the client to put in new attacks, tell it what to do, how to identify the kind of words that are being used. So it really, really is helping people who are victims of a new form of crime help with themselves.
Yeah, that does sound like a very, very practical and very useful use of automation, especially, as you said, a kind of a new form of crime, which is probably only going to grow, probably also exponentially, like we see in the fields such as For example, WordPress has a huge market share, and that's why WordPress websites are so often the target of attacks, just because it's such a large percentage of the web. And I guess it's much easier. I think I had a conversation about this once, that of course you'd be more worried about somebody breaking into your house, but you'd be much less concerned about it happening than somebody hacking into your website, stealing your personal information, stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a fascinating, and I like it because you can basically, if you think of what they're doing there, they're taking advice that's provided by humans and turning it into a machine. That's automation.
Exactly.
And that you could apply that to, for example, charities that may be helping people with medical problems, or charities that are helping people who want to go to university, who want to understand the process. So you can extend that model to all sorts of different use cases relatively easily.
Yeah, it's actionable, real life help that helps in all kinds of situations, not just something cyber or digital related. And also,
if people want to check that one out, if you Google cyber helpline, then the chatbot is there and live, so you can go and use it at any time. Hopefully you're not a victim of crime, but it's there to have a look at if you want to see it in action.
Awesome. I'll link that in the additional resources for the podcast episode. And also, what you said has got me thinking, this is a perfect example of how automation and humans have to work together, because this wouldn't be possible simply with automation. And it would be much, much, much harder to do it on such a scale and such a high rate of success if it were only coming from the human side. So this is a prime example of maybe what the future holds in store for kind of the merging of automation, of AI and human input.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. We kind of covered some of the values of automation already. What about some of the main challenges and concerns with automations, apart from maybe the security concerns that we've already exposed a bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are probably two areas which maybe hold back adoption, or are challenges of adopting automation and conversational artificial intelligence. So the first one really is about some poor historic experiences. So if you think about new technologies, when they come on stream and they start being used, typically there's a lot of hype early on. Lots of people are very excited about how a particular new technology is going to change the world. So expectations are really, really raised. And then really what happens is the early iterations of that technology are quite disappointing. So a lot of people's early experience with chatbots has been quite poor. Everyone's used a chatbot where they've not managed to get an answer, or the chatbots just talk gibberish back to them. So we're at the stage now where we're probably coming out of that dip, and actually the technology and the implementation of the technology is now up to a standard where we can deliver against expectations. But those historic problems people have had kind of hold them back a little bit in their thinking. So that's one of the things we come up with, which is why we really recommend a very iterative approach. So start small, lots of small experiments, and learn and build, rather than thinking that a chatbot is going to save the world, or a chatbot is going to deliver every answer to every problem that your organization faces, because it won't. So start small and learn, and actually you can learn as the technology learns, and that will be in the future a competitive advantage for lots of businesses, because they've got in there early rather than they're waiting until someone else has used it better.
Yeah, because you have to do the work regardless. So if you start doing it early, you have an advantage over the people who start doing it late, because they'll have to do the same thing basically. If they're not super pioneers or kind of standing on the shoulders of giants and already wait for everybody else to kind of innovate and produce the best possible solutions. Yeah. As you said, it's kind of the first impression that makes the biggest impact. And that's probably why, one of the major reasons why we're seeing maybe not as much adoption of automation as the initial hype would have us believe.
Yeah, it's definitely in our minds, it's definitely better to do a small number of things very well than try and do a lot of things and not do them very well.
Yeah, good is better than perfect, right?
Exactly.
And you mentioned another area of concerns.
Really is about technology choices. So the maturity of the technology that we're dealing with at the moment, there are still lots of different technology choices. So, I mean, I've worked in the web for 20 years. I remember the pre-CMS era, so before the likes of WordPress or Drupal came along, and actually people were building custom CMSs. If you think about where we are with conversational AI, we're probably at that stage when things like Drupal and WordPress were starting to emerge. So there is some coalescence around technologies, but actually there aren't obvious choices for lots of the technologies that you're using. There are plenty of obviously cloud services that we can plug together, but actually some of the enterprise maturity isn't quite there yet. We've developed a open source framework called Open Dialogue, which is actually our solution to the challenges of not having a bespoke system. So it's the start of something like a content management system, but for conversational AI, which allows you to plug in things like Google, Amazon, Microsoft technologies, but also manage them yourselves and integrate other systems. Because one of the challenges of delivering true customer service through conversational automation is about integrating with other systems. So maybe your CRM system or your payment system or your ticketing system. And in the integration there, you need to, unless you build it bespoke, you need to get some tools. And Open Dialogue is our open source solution for doing that.
Yeah, integration is definitely one of the key things that your platform needs to take care of if you want to compete in the kind of multi-channel and the ubiquity of digital experience world.
Absolutely. It's impossible to deliver lots of the tasks that users want, even simple ones, if you're not going back to the original system of record or the back office system.
Hey, but what I noticed that we haven't really talked much about the ethical concerns of automation and probably more specifically AI and machine learning. Do you have any thoughts of that maybe?
I think it's a very hot topic for us at the moment. There's some challenges in the UK about the awarding of exam results recently on the basis of algorithms because of the cancellation of exams. And one of the topics that we talk a lot about is actually we have to think about, are we asking the AI the right questions early on? If we ask AI the wrong questions, we will get the wrong results based on the data we put into it. And one of the challenges is actually making sure that we don't ask the wrong questions to the systems we build. We think very carefully about the questions we ask, the data that we're going to be training the tools on, and how that could introduce bias or inadvertent results into it. And yes, there are lots of examples where people have got that wrong. But our steer is, if we start small and don't ask big, complex questions, then we can learn and we can make smaller mistakes before we go into bigger deployments.
Would you say that this is one of the biggest challenges or kind of issues that AI needs to overcome before seeing widespread to worldwide adoption?
I think it's overcoming. I think it's in progress. I think we're seeing people learn very rapidly, and AI is behind lots of things that people use without even realizing it.
Yeah, exactly.
When they use predictive text on their mobile phones, which they have been for some years now, they are using artificial intelligence. But what we see is, as the adoption broadens out beyond those really, really early adopters, there's another wave of learning to happen. And I think that's where organizations need to be careful, because there's reputational risk if they get it wrong, if they don't think about the ethical side of the questions they ask of AI early in their projects.
Yep, definitely. Okay, we're already kind of going more current with our discussion. I mean, okay, it is in its essence a current discussion, because it wouldn't have been possible on such a scale maybe 5 or 10 years ago. But like, we are in 2020 after all. So how would you say that the COVID crisis that we're going through right now is affecting the future of automation? Like, there are probably some huge shifts that we're noticing already in that sphere.
I think I think the way that COVID has changed the way that organizations have to interact with their customers means that people have been far more open to automating technologies, because they realize actually automation is a way to deal with some of the challenges of people not being able to be face to face, or having restricted capacity in existing channels, for example, because you can't have as many people working in a call center because of social distancing. So there's definitely, we have seen in the past 3 to 4 months an acceleration in the type of work and the number of projects we're being asked to take on, the ambition of those projects as well, and the pace at which we deliver those projects. So for us, it's kind of a compression of a trend that was already there already. And it's an exciting time to be working with these kind of technologies.
Yeah, and the key word here is, I think, compression, because I've heard numerous times it being said that basically the major thing the COVID crisis did was to condense the digital transformation that was supposed to happen in the span of maybe 2 years to just a few months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other interesting thing is for us is how automation and conversational interfaces are starting to become the norm. So the fact that more people have worked from home than ever before, and more people are using things like Slack, Facebook at work, all those kind of tools, that means that people are far more comfortable using those tools for things that they weren't previously doing, which actually means that the conversational interface is just normal. So in a way, it doesn't take a big leap to say in an organization, why would an organization have an intranet if they're using a conversational interface when actually you could just ask a bot any question and then the bot does all the hard work of retrieving that organizational information from data repositories all over the organization, rather than trying to have an intranet layer that presents that information in a very traditional web interface. So that kind of adoption of the conversational interface, I think, is a real enabler for another stage of organizational transformation.
It's like almost accidental adoption, right? Kind of spontaneous adoption.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the door. And the fascinating thing is, what doors does that open for things that we haven't even thought of yet?
Yeah, because before, say, March, most people would not have thought of that, as you said.
Yeah, so we're really excited to discover and do new things as those opportunities emerge.
Yeah, I guess every crisis truly is an opportunity if you know how to act on it.
Indeed.
And it's interesting, you mentioned Slack as something that you use frequently daily. Like, I remember the first time I used Slack, I was really, really like impressed by the Slack bot. Like, I just thought that, I mean, the way that it responded to you even then 2 years ago was really on point, and just the whole way of how they set it up to kind of really brighten your day with inspirational greetings early in the morning that were original and usually also contained some puns or something. Like, I remember one of my favorite ones being, "Be cool, but also be warm." Stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely something that is facilitated through the digitalization spurred on by COVID-19. I think I covered everything that I wanted to talk to you about that's automation specific. Is there something that you'd like to point out or cover that we haven't really thought of earlier?
It's been a fascinating conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. The thing I would, if people are really interested in this kind of area, there's a book written by our co-founder, Dr. Ronald Ashry, called "The AI-Powered Workplace," published last year, so still pretty up to date, and definitely worth a read because it talks about lots of the trends that we've talked about today, and provides a real practical handbook on how you can get started with this kind of thing. So, yeah, I think we'll hopefully share that link in the notes afterwards as well, because it's a great book to have a look at.
Yeah, I'll do that. I always try to include all the things that might be relevant to the readers, to the listeners, because the aim of this podcast is to educate, to provide info, to provide insights, and as much as possible is better than some lacking points.
Brilliant.
Okay, great. Yeah, as you said, it's been a great conversation. I'm really happy to have you here. Just before we conclude, if people want to reach out to you or learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, for Green Shoot Labs, if they check out the website at www.greenshoot.labs.com, I've got a website at simonwakeman.com where I talk about these kind of things. And yeah, Twitter is a good place to have a conversation. So I'm Simon Wakeman on Twitter as well.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Thanks for the great chat. And to our listeners, that's all for this episode. Have a great day, everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to check out our other episodes, you can find all of them at agiledrop.com/podcast, as well as on all the most popular podcasting platforms. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes, and don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and colleagues.